God.
Oh, hey, Andrew. How are you doing?
Oh my God. That is beautiful for a April Fool's Day. That's really good.
That's the only thing
I've
I
been
got.
talking I've been talking with my wife over the years about moving to Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it's ever gonna happen, but we're talking about it again last night, and the kids are just like, we don't want to move. I'm like, you might like Hawaii. You never know. That we don't want to move. So I got them today, man. I got them today. In the morning, I got them together. I'm like, I got to talk to you too, real serious. Like, your mother and I were talking last night. I did the setup the night before, Ryan. I already planted the seed in their little fuzzy brains. And I'm like, your mother and I were talking, and one of them said, uh-oh. And I said, pause for a little bit. We've decided that we're moving to Hawaii. And they're like, what? No, freaking out. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to pack up all our stuff this summer, and we're going to move all our stuff and all our animals, and we're moving this summer to Hawaii. And they were flipping out. Like, one kid ran to the bed, started screaming and pounding on the bed. Meanwhile, like, if these kids realized that they might actually, like, if they get the chance to grow up in Hawaii, they would probably love it with the beach and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I was finally just like, gotcha, April Fools. They were so mad. They came over, they started pounding me like this. It was beautiful. It was a work of art.
Man,
It was a work of art.
I think my daughter would hate me for life if I did that to her. But I don't know. It just depends on the kid's personality. So.
Well, there's a viral video out there of a dad that he got his 3 daughters ready to go to school. He said that school started early, got them ready to go to school, and he just stood in the window watching them while they were waiting for the bus. And then they all realized that he totally made it up and there's no school, and they're so mad. They're like, Dad!
There's this one viral video I've been seeing.
Matt Stein
probably going to get...
as a work of art. It's beautiful.
Probably going to get the video pulled for copyright.
Whatever.
Anyway,
there's no way a Rickroll can be copyrighted. Like, it's everywhere now.
Is it public domain at this point?
It has to be, doesn't it? I would think. I don't know.
You would think. Hey, so everybody, welcome to CraftQuest on Call. I'm Ryan. This is singer extraordinaire, Andrew. I didn't realize that you did that type of performance on the side. I know you have a lot of side hobbies that are not programming, like rings and punching bags and pegboards.
But singing is not one of them. Singing is not
okay.
one of them. Yeah.
And apparently it's snowing there today, which is interesting. Watch your language.
Yesterday I went on a hike in just a t-shirt. Okay. And today I opened my door. Like, I went down to the office this morning. Everything was normal. Then I opened my door just to go up to the house just before the show. And it's snowing outside. I'm like, what the? Oh my God. Something's not right.
It was actually this morning when I was up, it was 46 degrees here, which is pretty cold for this time of year. And then, you know how at dawn, right, the temperature kind of dips a little bit right as the sun comes up. So it was 46 at dark, and then when the sun came up, it was 42. So it got colder. That's a little chilly.
I try to make a habit to not be. I try to make a habit to not be awake when the sun is rising.
Really? Well, it's hard now. It's like it rises so much later, 7:30-ish, something like that here.
I can handle it. I can handle it. Yeah,
right, well,
I can handle that sleeping in thing.
I'll text you when I get up next time at 5.
Sean is saying Andrew has the moves that make my stomach churn. I think you traumatized everyone that's watching this video live, Ryan. I hope you're happy.
Well, I was going to announce it's the last CraftQuest on Call, so I thought I would just destroy everybody so they never want to come back. Actually, it's not the last one. That's not actually. It's weird. I didn't mean it as an April Fool's joke. So I didn't do any April Fool's jokes this year. I feel like everybody's probably going to get their fair share. But
yeah.
Anyway, but that video I showed, so Matt Stein, who works at Pixel and Tonic, I guess he created that, right, on some service that will help you create deep fakes or whatever. So
Yeah, whatever that thing is on that logo that's on it. Yeah, some
yeah,
little
so
app.
the credit to Matt for that. He posted it on Twitter a
Well,
couple
he
weeks
actually
ago.
sent it to me privately,
Oh, he did.
and I'm just
Did
like,
he ask for
I was like,
permission
this is
first?
so hilarious. Why are you not posting this publicly somewhere? He's like, well, I thought it would be rude to do that. I'm like, dude, come on, it's
Isn't he
me.
the
Post
nicest
it.
person? Yeah.
He can be vicious too, man. He can be vicious.
Matt?
You don't know.
No.
Oh yeah, you don't know.
Maybe.
Mhm.
Not to me. Maybe he doesn't like you. Is that it?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. All right. A link to it. Yeah, we'll drop a link in the chat to the Matt's Twitter post of that video. That's where I stole it from. All right, everybody. So yeah, welcome to CraftQuest on Call number 20. Andrew, we've done 20 of these official CraftQuest on calls. So I don't know what that means. I was trying to figure out some like deep math that went with this because it is April 1st. So 4 times 1 is 4. And then times 5 is 20. But I couldn't get any further than that. So we'll just leave it that this is our 20th episode of CraftQuest on Call. And we have a whole docket of stuff to cover today. First up, we're going to talk about best practices for database servers and backups.
And I even have a surprise, Ryan. I have a little
Oh.
surprise that if we wanted to do it.
Did you get me
I
something?
prepared.
Oh. I thought maybe you sent me a bottle of like scotch or brandy or something like that.
That's my line, first of all. You're the one that promised me. Second of all, I have sent you stuff. Unrequited, I shall say. They're completely unrequited. No, there's, and we don't even have to get to it, but there's a little something that I thought might be neat to look at that if we end up having time, we can do it.
All right. That sounds good. Let's start with the first question. You want to jump right into it? And if you have questions, I saw that Sean posted a question in the chat. If you have questions that you want to ask us during the live stream or to respond to something that we're talking about, tell us what we said wrong. That is always welcome. Then let us know in the chat and we'll respond. All right, Andrew. I wish I could read. Hang on.
You wish you could read?
Yeah, I wish I could read.
It is an essential skill these days. Saying.
So when I pull up, how do I do this?
I want to show you something, Ryan.
All right.
I was very excited
how to
about
use
this.
my computer.
You see this?
What is that? Is that like a bar or something?
It's a cappuccino blonde brownie, right?
Oh.
And I was thrilled because I looked at the little label today, and it said it was 118 calories. And I was just looking at him like, man, I would have eaten you if you were 500. Like, I don't even care. But the fact that it's 118, I'm like, yeah, this thing is going down.
Oh man, I'm so hungry. I just had like a fruit and vegetable pouch because apparently I'm 3 years old.
Do you want to see my vegan safe? This is actually from an all natural like food place kind of thing. So this is a vegan safe.
It's not vegan.
Blonde espresso. Yes, it is. I swear to you.
No, it's not.
Lori's Natural Foods is where we go, and I got it, and it said vegan on it.
I'm gonna give Lori a call and ask her if that's true. All right, I just have to pull up my Airtable database on my iPad because when I go full screen to show these questions, it hides everything else. All right.
Oh, okay.
So it's just a little bit of a.
Well, while you're doing that, why don't I see if I can address Sean's question here? So he said, what do you feel is essential to include in a craft starter setup? Build process, plugins, templates, settings, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, I think he's asking in generalities, like what should be included. And I think it's an interesting question, and I often would also kind of reverse it a little bit and say what should not be included. So what I try to include is a base layer on top of which I can build just about anything. Or I could really easily like just uninstall a plugin or whatever and build literally anything using that setup. So, I mean, you've seen my setup, Sean. It's on github.com, nystudio107/craft. It includes all of those things. It includes the build process, like the front end build chain. It includes base templates. It includes set plugins that I'm going to use almost every time. And it also includes a starter database that has just some very basic settings that are built into it. Now, what I'm using isn't necessarily what you should be using, because it depends on how you build websites and what you consider important in the projects that you're building, you know? But I do think that you can include all these things. I think you can include whatever base foundational stuff that you find yourself reusing over and over again. That's what should be in your starter. So your goal with your starter should be whatever is in there, it's additive, right? So you're just going to add to what is there. If you have a starter and you find that you're tearing a lot of stuff out or you're removing a lot of stuff, then I think that you probably have done too much, and you should take away from the starter and make it a little bit more basic and a little bit more bare bones, a little bit more scaffolding. Like, for instance, for the templates, the only thing I include is my base templating setup that is completely agnostic in terms of what you're going to build. It just makes building some stuff a little bit better. If you include stuff like a prefab blog setup or whatever, like you're going to find you're going to be taking that away a lot of the times for sites that don't use it, for instance, or you're going to be modifying it a lot because the sites are going to be very different. I think most of the sites that we build in Craft, if we should be building them in Craft at all, they should be pretty bespoke and pretty custom. So it's fine for the base setup to be opinionated in terms of tooling and build process and that kind of stuff. But I just wouldn't include a whole lot in terms of specifics, in terms of what we're actually going to end up building from it. I don't know if that is helpful. What about you, Ron? What do you think about that?
Whoa, hang on.
What? You all right?
Yeah. 1 second.
But my too long didn't read on it is that whatever you use for your base setup, it should be additive from there, right? So you should have the base setup should be pared down to the point where you find yourself just adding stuff to it to build what you want. If you find yourself removing from it, then probably you put too much in there.
Yeah. No, I'm with you 100%. I think that's the right way to go. Sorry.
And you'll also know. So if you build a base setup and on a number of new projects, you find yourself adding a particular thing, well, then that's your cue that probably that should be part of your base setup too, you know? So part of it, I think you have to make some pretty smart decisions early on. And then just, look at your usage, look at what you use, what you don't use, and you'll be constantly refining it, I think.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Sean. It's a good answer. Let's move into the next one, which was submitted at craftquest.io/on-call. And this one is from Zebra. And show my desktop. And Zebra asks, I just have like a summary of the question. Zebra says, I'm having trouble with the DevOps best practice of database backups. I hear you and Andrew talk about how web servers and containers should be disposable and be able to be rebuilt if necessary. This makes sense if the only content served from this disposable web server is files. Like that can be easily repulled from a GitHub repo. But what about database servers? Should databases always be external to the server? And if so, should this external database server also be disposable? If so, should you just always have scheduled DB backups to pull from? All right, Andrew, there's a fair amount going on here. So Zebra's alluding to conversations that we've had, and probably some of the Docker conversations too, about kind of spinning up containers. And I believe I've mentioned that, I see web servers as disposable, meaning that there should never be anything stored on them that can't be pulled from somewhere else if you need to rebuild the server quickly. It shouldn't be like the single source of any data. So
see, I think a way you can think about it, Ryan, is it's the oh crap factor. Right. So if you hear that if your client calls you up and says our server was destroyed,
Right.
how loudly do you say, "Oh crap"? You know what I mean? Like, how much work is it going to be to restore this from whatever places the things exist?
Right.
And I think that's kind of the way I measure things, in terms of like what's likely to go wrong. Well, the most likely thing to go wrong is the client screws something up. How easy is it to restore the database so that that's fixed? And then, I mean, it does happen. Like I recently had it. We did this video series where a friend of a friend didn't pay his DigitalOcean bill, so the server was just destroyed, right?
Yeah.
And then it was it was like, all right, well then how do we restore that? You know what I mean? So I do think that's a good way to think about it. Like if the server just disappeared, how much work would it be for you to get this thing back up and running? And kind of gear the way you do things around that. And I wrote that article a long time ago about database backups, and it talks about that in terms of not just have a plan for what you're going to do, but actually test that plan, right? So it can be even on a disposable site that you're just using just to test like the way that you're doing stuff, but go in there and like nuke the site and make sure that your backups work and that you can restore this. And you know what I mean? So don't just, it's kind of like, if there's a fire in your house, you want to know how you're going to get out of it. You know what I mean? And you want to practice that at least once, to make sure it'll actually work.
Yeah. So I would add that to me, it always goes back to structuring everything in a way that supports like a worst case scenario or getting out of a worst case scenario, which is kind of what you're getting at. But it goes back to like choosing, what service you use to host your web server, how they structure things, because you could do all the backups in the world, but but the amount of work it's going to take to restore is going to be considerably different depending on if the database server is separate from the web server, or let's just say you decided that you're going to spin up an EC2 instance in AWS, and then you're just going to have the database server right there. Like if you use something like Forge, right? They kind of let you do that. You can be like, oh, I'm just going to add a database, because they provision MySQL right on there. Then if that EC2 instance goes down, then you've lost both things. So I'll give you an example. Last summer, it was actually on July 4th. I think I messaged you about this. Is that so? Some sites that I manage, there are about 20 sites spread across a couple EC2 instances. They're all like kind of small sites, but they were on EC2 instances, and they were compromised, and I had to quickly basically shut down the instance completely and then rebuild the web server from scratch and then redeploy all the sites. Now, the way I had it set up is that RDS, which is the relational database service from AWS, that is its own like database. You get your own database server, and you can even have redundant database servers across the world. They call it multi availability zone. So, and it's all about like performance, but also if like one part of the world of the AWS infrastructure goes down, or a data center has downtime, that your database is still up. But anyway, what saved me is that I did use the RDS setup, which does cost a premium, because the database was fine. It just sat there. There's no way to get to that database server via RDS unless you're going through the web servers. And there wasn't any, compromise in terms of people being able to get into the server in SSH. So all I had to do was just redeploy, like in my deploy tool, just redeploy everything from GitHub. And there's a little bit, like I learned a few things. I didn't have like some of the environment stuff set up exactly right. So there's a little bit of work there, but then it just connected to the database, and the sites just came up one by one as I redeployed them and pointed and reassigned the IP address. Another thing AWS has is called Elastic IPs, which is basically an IP that you own, and then you can just attach it to different servers. So you can, like, if a server crashes, you just take that IP and move it, and then your DNS records don't ever have to change because they just have that same IP address. So the whole point is use those investigate how your host or the infrastructure service that you're going to use, how they manage things and what their best practices are, and then use those. We have, like, I know that Matt at Served also does the same thing with, your database server is its own container. Even like Nitro locally, right? It has its own container for the database server. And I'm pretty sure the guys at Fort Rabbit do the same thing. So it's like, when you structure how you're hosting, go for those best practices, and then everything else will be a lot easier. He does ask, or she does ask, about scheduled backups. So again, you have to have a multi-pronged approach. Use the scheduled backup service available through, if the hosting provider has one, use that, because typically they'll snapshot the database server, like at the server level. They'll just snapshot the whole thing, and you can actually restore the entire thing rather than just exporting. Use that, but also, figure out a way of doing regular database exports that are stored incrementally and then rolled off, depending on whatever your time frame is that you want to hold them. So I used a script that I wrote it, but I sort of put it together from other people's material that basically did a backup of the databases, uploaded them to S3 buckets, and then kind of rolled off the old versions. So there's all those things. Yeah. So anyway, what Zebra is asking is the right stuff to ask, but I would say, assume that web servers are disposable. You want your database, like how you choose to host your database, you want that to be as solid as possible, because if you're doing things right, everything else should be easily replaceable. The database is like, unless you're doing replication, which, most people probably aren't unless they're scaling a little bit bigger, then you really want to protect your database with how you set it up, not just backups, like actually how you set up the database itself. So
concrete examples in terms of doing this, the way that I do it is I back up the database every day. So every day it does a database backup, and it does that locally on the machine, right? So on the VPS that it's running on. This is assuming a more traditional VPS hosted, whatever the environment is. So it's going to dump it on there, whether it's an external database or not, right? So it will dump them there. So the reason I do that is one of the biggest, quote unquote, catastrophic things that happens is someone ends up going in and deleting stuff they shouldn't, or changing stuff that they shouldn't, or whatever. So having those local database backups being on the server makes it so easy to just SSH in, restore the database from the backup that's sitting there on the server, and the client thinks you're a hero. So that's great. You've solved that problem. That doesn't solve the problem of catastrophic failure of the VPS just dies. And, it's less likely that that's going to happen, but it's also, as I mentioned, more catastrophic when it does. So what I then do is I back up the backups. So I do something very similar to what you're talking about, Ryan, which is I have a little script that runs, and it backs up the database backups to an S3 bucket that's sitting there. And then I also have that S3 bucket hooked up to AWS Glacier, so that after a certain time period, the backups that are sitting in that S3 bucket will be backed up to Amazon's like long-term storage stuff. Probably overkill for most websites. Most websites are not that mission critical, and you're not going to need a database backup 10 years later. You've probably long since moved on by then. But basically, having local backups daily and then backing up those backups offline, I think that's a pretty good combination. And you can, I've got custom scripts that I wrote called craft scripts that are up on my GitHub, but also just as a simple way to do it, you can just set up a cron job that runs craft's backup command. So their backup, their general config has a max backup setting. So you can tell it how many should be in there. By default, it's 20. But you could just set up a cron job, and both Ploy and Forge have a GUI for setting up regular tasks like this. And you can just tell it, kick off the backup every time, once a day or something like that. And you could also optionally have the backup before updates on if you're updating in production, which I don't know. I think you probably shouldn't be, so forget that I mentioned that.
What did you say? Updating in production?
Good Lord. Yeah, forget I said that.
Yeah, no, I think but you have to test. Well, I think you mentioned this earlier, but like actually test those backups too. Even if
Yes.
you bring them
Yes.
down locally and import them and just be like, okay, everything's running. I can, like test the backups.
That's right.
To make sure that
That's right. And if you do maintenance for a client, part of, once you have these systems set up, part of your maintenance should be doing a drill to make
Right.
sure that the backup stuff works, right? So
Right.
that should be 100% part of your maintenance contract. And that actually is a pretty easy sell for most clients, that you're going to actually test that the emergency backups and stuff work. So you're going to go in, you're going to make sure the stuff that should be backed up is backed up. You're going to restore the database locally, make sure it can be restored, do all those kinds of things. And if you can get it to the point where it's not a big deal, like your oh crap scale is just like, crap, because it will be relatively easy to bring it back up. I mean, that's where you want to be. That's really where you want to be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally agree. All right. You ready for the next question?
I was born ready, except for the stupid snow outside.
Justin says, we are currently deciding between using Sprig or Vue for a state-heavy craft application and wanted to get your opinions on which you would choose if you were starting a similar project. So Justin didn't, I'm just going to look at my notes here. Yeah, so that was the entire question. So I don't have any other details about what the question would be. I did see that Justin was in the chat. So I definitely wanted to get your take on this, Andrew. And I guess I would also want to talk about, like, is there actually a choice between Sprig and Vue? I guess it depends on what you're doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, state heavy can mean a whole lot of things, but as soon as I see state heavy, I immediately think front end framework, because
you want to explain what state heavy would mean?
It would mean that you have something relatively complicated running on the front end that has a whole lot of, let's just call them variables that are interdependent. You know what I mean? Like you flick one switch and it may cascade and change a whole bunch of other stuff, and a lot of interrelated things. And state is just whatever would be needed to replicate the state. How can I define this without using the word? Whatever would be used to replicate the way the application looks. Everything that you need to make sure that that is synced up is the state of the application. Now, if it's a brochure website, there almost is no state,
Right.
But if it's a web application where you're doing stuff, you're have a complicated UI or whatever, that's where you start to want to have something that will manage that state. And I think you could look at something like Vue with Vuex, or even if you're using Vue 3, you can use the composition API as a nice way to handle global state as well. I feel like I'm at a disadvantage. I don't know enough about this. And Justin is saying that application has a lot of back-end logic that has to run based on conditional form selects. For instance, select an option when we run a bunch of back-end stuff to determine the next set of options. Okay, well, that being the case, if you already have a lot of your logic on the back end, I would be tempted maybe to change my opinion and maybe keep that logic on the back end, because it really is easiest if you have one thing that is responsible for the state. I don't care if it's the front end, I don't care if it's the server, but one thing that is responsible for that state, rather than having two things that want to own that state and trying to sync up between the two. I think that's where it gets overly complicated. Yeah. You certainly could still use a lightweight JavaScript framework on the front end to communicate with the back end, but definitely decide who is going to be in charge of this stuff. It's fine to use a framework, but still leave a lot of the state and that kind of stuff for the back end. It would also be fine to use something like Sprig, depending on the complexity of what you're doing, I would say. Ryan, you've used Sprig more than I have, so I'll defer to you on that. But
I was actually going to say that it also depends on the skill set. I mean, there's so many things. Like, what's the timeline for?
What are you good at?
Like, what's your skill set? or the skill set of the person doing that might be doing either Vue or Sprig. If they're more like comfortable just working in traditional like front end, non-Vue front end code, and especially in the Craft ecosystem, then Sprig might be an easier take for them. And if they don't have to then worry about state, then Sprig will maybe be a better thing. But I guess it really depends on the specs of the project and the skill set of the person doing the work.
And is this something that you need to think about? Will we ever not use Craft? Does it make sense that, right. What is our backend actually? And what would it be like if we were to move away from using Craft? What would it be like in terms of keeping this stuff? And how would that all work, But I think you made the point that I wanted to make too, which is that look at your skill set and what are you good at, and whichever one you're better at, and then look at the advantages each of those tools offer. And sometimes your skill advantage in one or the other can make up for deficiencies in the platform, depending on what it is. You know, like let's say you're super good at. Go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing that I always asked developers to do is with like each new like feature that we would have to develop. We would do first we would do like, kind of like a little bit of a discovery to kind of understand like what the technical approach is, but then we would do some proof of concept. So like if we didn't know, let's say which, like in this case, Sprig or Vue, because if it's just like sprinkling reactivity into a template or into a page, then, and we don't know what the best solution would be, then we do a couple proof of concepts where we just use Sprig to do that, or a version of whatever a small feature is, and then use Vue and help that be like a slice of, insight into what it would be like if we took the whole thing on with one of these technologies. And that way, like, because what we shouldn't ever do is travel down a path blindly. We should always have a little bit of insight into that and then decide, okay, like, I'm pretty confident we can go down this path. There'd be X, Y, and Z challenges, but we know that, that we've done our proof of concept. We know that we can actually get there. Don't go like down that path without trying things first. So try Vue, try Sprig, because maybe the person that is doing it is a huge. You might have one person on your team advocating for Vue because they write a lot of Vue code. And then there might be someone else that's, more comfortable in Sprig. So who's going to do the work? Do like an analysis of like what the best option would be based on actual, like write some actual code before you do the work. That type of like proof of concepting, testing out different ideas, like that is also the work in addition to like coding the feature itself. You don't have to jump right in. That would be my take.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think I've mentioned this story before, but I had a guy who was asking me, he wanted to assemble a team to build a project. And he's like, I don't know what language I should use. I'm like, well, what's the talent pool? What right. What do the people in your area know? Because, that's going to matter more than the language that you pick in terms of building this thing and maintaining this thing. Obviously there are some advantages to various frameworks and languages and that type of stuff, but I think the bigger edge and advantage is the skill set of the people using it. And let's keep this in mind too, the skill set that you want to have, right? So let's say that you are a traditional Craft CMS developer, but you really have been interested in maybe doing something with Nuxt or Next or, something like that. Well, then maybe you would do it in Vue so that you could upskill so that you would be able to do your next project in Nuxt, or you would move towards doing more Vue stuff on the front end. So you can also look at it from that perspective, is just not just in what I'm good at now. Is that English? Not just what am I good at now?
It's a version of
but
English.
What do I want to be good at, and what do I want to be doing? And that can factor in. That can 100% factor in.
Yeah, I'm with you. Ben Kroger wrote TLDR semicolon. It depends. Which is true, and like, so Justin, it's a good question, and I hope we didn't give like a cop-out answer, but I think so much of it does depend on, like, I tend to be like an approach kind of like framework person, not framework like coding framework, but just like a framework for a project and how to approach a problem. And that's why I always kind of zoom out. And you can tell I've been like a manager in my past life. But that's just kind of how I would approach things. All right, we're on a roll, Andrew. So I think we should do another question while you're all warmed up with your with all your good insights on everything. All right, let's see.
I don't know about that.
All right, here we go.
I'm trying to resist eating this stupid espresso thing. I know it's terrible if I'm eating
we're
it
gonna
on
go.
air, so
We're gonna go so long today, so you don't even get to eat it until like 3 p.m. All right. Anonymous says, I recently ran into an issue where the project config files on my production site showed as having updates, but I got an error about plugin versions when applying the updates. The updates like to the project config. What are the best practices for resolving project config issues? So what this person is talking about is if you like deploy to production server and it says, you get this little banner saying there's project config updates, and you go to the utilities section and project config, and then you can apply just the updates. And I guess they got an error saying like there's some plugins. The project config was expecting plugin such and such to be a different version or something like that. So there was something got out of whack somewhere in the process.
I'm gonna do my Kim's Convenience imitation. Stop.
Okay.
Stop.
Kim's Convenience
if we got to the point,
is a Netflix show. Go ahead.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
If we got to the point where we're seeing this little red banner in the CP, I think we've already made a mistake, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think that this part of the deploy process should be automatic. Okay. So whenever you deploy to your production environment, the project config should automatically be applied by your deploy script, in my opinion. I also think that the composer packages should automatically be updated via your deploy script. So in other words, on your production server or your deployment server, however you're doing it, it should run a composer install, which will take whatever's in the lock file and it will make sure all those packages are available. The other thing I would say, and I wanted to just preface that, because if we're seeing these kind of errors in the CP, to me that means that we don't have an automated deployment process in place. And I think we should, because it will eliminate this whole class of problems. Like, you're just not going to have this class of problems. The other thing that I would want to mention about, so the other thing that I would want to mention about it is to read the error message carefully, because a lot of times you just see this red, you'll see this error, you'll be like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. But the error message will probably tell you what's wrong. And if in this issue he sent in, he put the actual error message in here, I probably would be able to tell you what it is. My guess is that the versions that are in the project config are different than what is installed because a composer install was not done on production, would be my guess. But I would need to see the actual error message to be able to tell you.
Or for some reason your project config files are just got out of date somehow. Like if you're using like a Git repository, what you have stored isn't actually current anymore. So let's talk about how to back out of this. Like, how do we fix this, regardless of if they have? I know like the deployment process is going to fix it long term, but to kind of reset things, my recommendation would be to go to the Craft docs and read about project config of how to start using it, and then just reset the whole thing. Now, this is harder if you have like more than one person working on the project. But what you do is you go and you get a database dump from the production server. You import that locally, and then you can regenerate all the project config files. You can delete them first, but you can also have it in the utilities section under project config. You can have it regenerate all the files, and then you commit those to, and you have to do this all like in a single timeline, a very short timeline, and you commit those, and then you deploy those back out, and then nothing should, like, the production server shouldn't have anything to say about those files because they should be exactly the same as what is on. Actually, I missed a step. You actually have to generate them first on project config too, on the production server too, I think. Right? Generate them on the production server, download the database, do that locally, get the updated versions in your Git repository, and then you can redeploy those, and nothing should happen because everything should be back in line. And now, when you create it like a feature branch, it's going to have that set of project config files. Let's say you create a new section or a new field, it should update those files, and then everything should be back in sync. If you have a staging server in between, you want to, update the staging server with the production database as well, and so it all matches. The key here is is that everything is lined up, because there's the UUIDs that are used, and there's other things that all have to line up across environments for this to work. Did I say that right? Okay.
I think so. The only thing I'm not clear on, Ryan, in your answer is where the database is involved, because unless I'm misunderstanding,
you regenerate the files from the database. There's an
Right.
option to regenerate.
Right. But the question is, who has the updated stuff, right? So it would depend on the error message in terms of whether it was telling me that what's installed is newer or older than
Right.
what is on, you know what I mean? So in terms of whether it should be generated from the database or whether the database should be updated based on the project config, depending on where it's coming from. In any event, I put a link in the discussion, and we'll have it on the video. In my updating for Craft article, there's a little section that it shows you how you can use the scripts in your composer.json to run stuff after Craft is updated or installed. And you can have it clear the caches, run all the migrations, and then apply all the project config stuff. And then anytime that you update it, whether it's in local dev, staging, production, wherever it is, it will make sure that these things are done. And it's much less likely that things are going to get out of sync the way that you have here. And I know it's a pain to set up these. A lot of people are like, oh man, I remember we used to just open transmit and just drag the stuff to the server, right? And it's true that was a lot simpler. But then again, what we're trying to do these days is a lot more complicated. It really is. If you went back to that method now, you would be in a world of hurt, I think. Yep. So spending a little bit of time up front to get your deployment to kind of just work and be deterministic. We're going to use a fancy word. We're using semicolons, and we're using the word deterministic.
Whoa.
Just means, I know, getting crazy.
Take it easy.
Just means that we know exactly what's going to happen, right? There's the outcome is known when we're doing it. Whereas if you're kind of just winging it and you're like, I'm going to drag this thing here and drag that thing there, that would be non-deterministic, I would say, Ryan.
All right, Andrew. I want to shift to something that I was working on this week, and then I have a question for you about it. Related.
Should I start my consulting billing clock now? If this is all about you and.
Oh gosh. All right. So over on the CraftQuest site, yesterday I released this feature. Hang on one second. Okay. About with a change log, and it has content additions. But the other thing it has is a website change, a software change log, like you would see in a software project. You look at, this is the Craft project, right? There's just change log, kind of tells you what's been updated and changed, deprecated, fixed, removed, and so forth. So anyway, I think this is helpful. But this has made me think, do you keep change logs for your website projects? And other people in the chat, do you also keep change logs for your website projects? I'm just curious, what the general consensus is. I know that, for plugins, of course, for software, shippable software, it's standard to keep change logs. But does everyone keep change logs for website projects as well? So Andrew, I'm going to ask you first, because I know you like to commit into the master branch directly on some things. So I'm not sure if that means that you assume it doesn't mean you don't keep a change log at all.
That is incorrect, sir. What you're alluding to is the fact that I would just merge it right in without doing the whole Git flow thing. And I want to say that after you chastised me for doing that, I watched you do it, Ryan. I watched you do it. Okay? So don't give me
Where did you watch
don't give
me
me
do
this
it?
do
Well,
as
I
I
don't
say.
I don't know
Don't
what
give
you're
me this
talking
do as I say, not as I do. Um anyway, I am very used to keeping change logs. I keep them for all of the plugin development that I do. And I also keep it for all of the scaffolding stuff that I do.
Mhm.
I don't often do it for the websites that I'm working on. I think that if it was a software as a service website, for instance, where we are literally adding features and functionality and that type of thing, then it probably would start to make sense to me. And I think I don't have a full-fledged idea of why I draw the line there, even though I do. I think it might be that when I'm working on plugins or I'm working on scaffolding, that type of thing, other people are interested in what these changes are, and it really affects other people to know about what these changes are.
Mhm.
Therefore, making a change log available provides use to a whole bunch of people. Whereas for your average website that is, it's a brochure site or whatever, nobody cares. You know what I mean? Like nobody
So,
cares that
yeah.
yeah.
And if as you as a developer, if you need to know what changed when, that's what your Git commit log is for, right? Like if you're using Git,
Yes.
you can go back and there's a dozen tools out there that actually create change logs from tags or commits and stuff. So there's all sorts of some people use that to generate change logs automatically.
So
Okay,
I guess that would be my answer, is whether
okay,
there is value to other people. And so I know you're doing it for CraftQuest, but I would consider CraftQuest to be a software as a service. And I do think that it has value to other people to see the changes that are there. So I think that would be my answer in terms of when it matters or when you should be keeping a formalized change log, is when it brings value to other people that might want to be able to look at that change log. Because as you said, you already have the Git commits. If it's just you can go back and look that way for what changed.
yep. All right. So I have one more question, and you said you had something prepared, or
Well, what about you in terms of the change log? I mean, you changed it so that you changed it so that you added a change log to CraftQuest. Like, what was your motivation there? Do you think that people might be interested in seeing the progress, or what's the deal?
I think people might be interested in seeing the progress. Like I try to make CraftQuest like the things that I do on it, because it is like the site is run on the thing that it teaches, that I try to
Yeah.
make it like as like inside out transparent as possible. And yeah, and I generally like to share like what's going on, because there's more to the site than just the content. Like I'm adding features, so it is a website. It is also it's not a SaaS product, but it's like it's a it is kind of like that. It's a subscription site, so I like to keep it up there. It's the same reason I have like uptime. If you go to status.craftquest.io, you can see the uptime of the site. It's all the same reasons. I just like to be transparent about what's happening. But
I mean, if you think about it, for any kind of content site, Ryan,
right,
like a blog is kind of a change log. You know what I mean? Like
right,
anytime
yeah,
that new content is posted, a new item is listed up there. If you have an RSS feed, each entry in the RSS feed that points to a video or audio or whatever, that's a major piece of content that has changed. So anytime it has value to other people to see or to learn about changes that don't really fit into those categories, I think is really useful. Like I think it's great to have a SaaS, and it looks like Ben Croker agrees. He says, "I love the CraftQuest change log more for the new features rather than the minor changes.
yeah.
Although bug fixes are useful, they affect users." So yeah, I mean, I specifically for your kind of site, I think a change log is useful. For scaffolding or for plugins or for things that a bunch of other people use, I think it totally makes sense to do it. For the average client's marketing brochure site, I wouldn't be writing a
Probably
change
not.
log,
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. All right. Next question. Another anonymous question. I'm planning a project where we need to query the Craft CMS database directly from an external application. What are some starting points to understanding the schema and how to query it? So Andrew, if you've worked with Craft at like extending Craft, you know that there's a layer of abstraction over top where you like with Yi, where you can query, like you basically can write element queries in PHP, and it makes it really easy to pull things together out of the database. But if someone needed to query it directly from another application, there's no example here of what they're trying to do, but like is this advisable? What would be your step for trying to understand like how everything is kind of pulled together? Like what is actually the query that is an element query creates? Like what is the SQL query and so forth? Because it seems like you'd have to kind of like reverse engineer things a little bit to try to understand how it's all put together.
So if I were this person's manager and they came to me and they said, this is what I'm planning to do, I would make them justify it. Like they would have to tell me why they actually need to query the database directly. As opposed to, for instance,
okay, go ahead.
As opposed to, for instance, creating an endpoint in Craft,
right,
and using the Craft APIs to return the data to them in a nice, neat form, whether that's the Element API or whether that's GraphQL, whatever it ends up being, I would be much more inclined to want to have a standardized GraphQL interface that I would provide to them to let them use from this external thing. For a variety of reasons. First of all, it takes care of that whole layer for you, right?
Right.
And there are layers there so that when Craft updates to Craft 4 and they rearrange the content table and how everything works, if you have this kind of intermediary API layer, it's all going to continue to work. Whereas your custom queries are going to break. Almost inevitably, they're going to break. And I would lean on and leverage everything that Pixel and Tonic has provided, and I would use a GraphQL API. The other reason is, if you decide to move to another system, then you still have this GraphQL API that you could just make the other system implement the same thing, and it would still work. So there is a huge benefit to having these kind of neutral APIs that are sitting in between things. So if I was your manager, sir or madam, whoever submitted this question, we would sit down, we would take the gloves off, and you would have to prove to me why you really, truly needed to do this, because it sounds like a bad idea.
So what you're saying is that the work in doing, using GraphQL, or even if just like a custom endpoint, is probably just as much work or less work than writing figuring it all out, writing the queries directly. Plus, it's more future-proof, because if they change the underlying database structure via migrations, then your queries don't break, because the way that you're getting stuff, you're basically getting the data out of Craft at the native level of Craft, and then exposing it rather than trying to, kind of use a hammer and get at it from outside. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think it definitely should take much less work to leverage these API layers than to figure out Craft's internal database schema. And so not only is it less work, but yes, the fragility issues of accessing this stuff directly, like just don't do it, And it actually kind of reminds me of what I was talking about before in terms of just uploading stuff by just dragging the files via FTP to your server, as opposed to using a deploy service. Well, it's kind of the same thing in a way, in that there's a lot more fragility in doing it the former way rather than going through the layers that are there. Sometimes the layers can be good, man,
Yeah, they can protect you.
Yeah.
All right. So that's all of our submitted questions. If anyone has a question while we are still streaming, you can drop it into the chat. We're happy to answer that. If you don't know where to submit a question, you can do it at any time throughout, in between live streams. So let me just pull it up real quick and I'll bring it up. So if you go to CraftQuest on craftquest.io/on-call, there's this beautiful form I say that sarcastically, where you can fill it out and submit it. And that goes into an Airtable database that I pull from for all the questions. And you can also mark whether you want to remain anonymous, then we'll just say that you're anonymous. Because some people don't like, if they work somewhere or something like that, they don't want to have their name up there. So that's it. So yeah, submit a question. We like the hard stuff, hard questions. Make Andrew code live and write a feature for you. No, don't do that.
I am not above embarrassing myself in public, as I have proven time and time again, Ryan. Time and time again. I am not above
what do you think the most embarrassing thing you've ever done in public? Would it be like, do you think that's the most embarrassing thing you've ever done?
No.
I've never
definitely
heard you
not
sing
even
before.
close.
I've actually never heard you do like, I'm not a dance, like the whole like shoulder pop thing. So I'm kind of impressed with that.
Yeah.
Nice.
I don't look it, but I'm a little limber. So can I should I show you this thing? Do you want to go OT, or do you want to just save it for another time? I'm totally cool with either way. Whatever you want to do.
Let's say we're at an hour, so we should save it for next time. Is it like a longer thing that we can noodle on a little bit?
Yeah, we can noodle.
All right. Let's save it for next time, and we have our dear audience has something to look forward to.
Yeah, it's going to be on using and abusing makefiles.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we can't do that at the end. We have to do that midstream. So
okay.
So people have all the energy. All right, Andrew. Thank you as always for your insightful answers. A good crop of questions. Thanks, Justin, for dropping a question in and joining. Thanks, Sean, for dropping a question into the chat. Appreciate that. And to Zebra and the two Anonymi. Is that the plural of anonymous? I don't know. And we appreciate everybody joining in and watching the live stream. We go live every first and third Thursday of the month. So we'll be back on the 15th, which here in the US is, actually they moved tax day to May 15th this year. So we can celebrate that by holding on to our money for another month. So that sounds good. All right.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you all on the next live stream. Take care.
Bye-bye.